Everyone has trauma. There, I said it. It's a big statement, but yes, we all carry some form of trauma, even if we don't recognize it as such. Why? Because trauma is a universal experience. It's simply part of being human. But it's hard to detect unhealed trauma if we don't know much about it, and most of us have a wrong idea about what trauma really is. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 10 signs that unresolved trauma might be controlling your life. I'm going to share with you what trauma actually is and tell you if healing is even possible. And you will find out if you're unconsciously carrying trauma that you've never acknowledged. And this was actually the case for me back then for many years, and also for many of my clients. And learning about the signs of trauma was the first step to creating awareness and ultimately healing. Now, if you're new here, I'm Conni Biesalski, a somatic trauma practitioner, a breathwork expert, and nervous system specialist. And on this channel, I share science-backed ideas and practices to regulate your nervous system and heal from stress and trauma. So before we dive into the signs and symptoms, let me show you what trauma really is, because we have to be on the same page before we go any further. Trauma is the Greek word for wound. Trauma is not a disorder, it's not a disease. It's been called that, but it is a wound. It may not be a physical wound, but it's a wound to our psyche and our soul. And from a physiological viewpoint, trauma is the unresolved energy from a past threat that remains trapped in the nervous system and is unable to complete its natural cycle of regulation. It is a profound physiological and psychological response to overwhelming experiences. And so trauma is not the actual event itself, but trauma is what happens inside the body and the nervous system as a result of the event. In Waking the Tiger, actually a really awesome book by Peter Levine, he writes, trauma has become so commonplace that most people don't even recognize its presence. It affects everyone. Each of us has had a traumatic experience at some point in our lives, regardless of whether it left us with an obvious case of post-traumatic stress. Because trauma symptoms can remain hidden for years after a triggering event, some of us who have been traumatized are not yet symptomatic. Yes, that tells you a lot about trauma. Now, there are two main types of trauma. There's shock trauma caused by single catastrophic events, and then there is developmental and attachment trauma, which is rooted in long-term emotional neglect and stress. So shock trauma is what most people think of when they hear the word trauma. It's a sudden, intense event that overwhelms the nervous system. For example, accidents, natural disasters, physical assault, sexual abuse, medical emergencies, war, etc. When you cannot fully process or discharge the survival energies from the trauma response, such as fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, it remains stuck, leading to dysregulation. So either overactivation or shutdown can lead to chronic stress or symptoms like the ones I will share with you in this video. And if you want to dive deeper here, I highly recommend the books Waking the Tiger and In an Invisible Voice, also by Peter Levine, the founder of the therapy modality somatic experiencing, which I'm also trained in. Now, the second type of trauma is more common, but it's often overlooked, namely developmental and attachment trauma. It occurs in childhood, mainly up to the age of 7, and is shaped by how caregivers interact with the child. It is not caused by just one major event, but by usually repeated experiences of emotional neglect, lack of attunement, or insecurity in your primary caregiver relationships. So for example, maybe you had parents who were emotionally unavailable. They were distant, maybe dismissive. Or you grew up in an environment of chronic stress, fear, or unpredictability. Or maybe you experience repeated experiences of feeling unseen, misunderstood, or feeling unsafe. Many people experience attachment trauma without realizing it because they assume trauma must involve extreme physical or emotional abuse. But subtle emotional neglect can be just as impactful. It leads to emotional learnings and core beliefs that limit our potential and influence how we act in relationships. And if you want to understand more about this type of trauma, then definitely check out this book by Lawrence Heller, the founder of the therapy modality NARM. It's called Healing Developmental Trauma. It's a really great introduction. So to summarize, trauma is not just about painful memories. It's about how the nervous system and the brain holds on to past stress and remains stuck in survival mode. Now let me show you the signs of unhealed trauma, starting with sign number 1. If you feel constantly on edge or jumpy or hyper aware of everything happening around you, this could be a sign of an overactive nervous system. Trauma keeps your body in a heightened state of alertness, scanning for potential threats even when there aren't any. And so that leads to chronic stress and anxiety and living in constant survival mode. This means you might be anxious a lot or tense or just feeling on edge a lot. Maybe you get startled easily by sudden noises, or you're hypersensitive to noises and smells. You might feel an ongoing sense of unease or dread, like something bad is about to happen. And you're probably ruminating a lot and analyzing events and situations. You might have trouble sleeping. Maybe you wake up in the middle of the night feeling really anxious or exhausted despite a full night's rest. And so what's happening is that trauma tricks your nervous system into thinking the past is still happening now. Even when everything is okay, your body doesn't fully believe it, and so it struggles to feel safe even when everything is objectively okay. Sign number 2. Now this one is one of the most intense ways trauma manifests, and it's also related to sign number 1, and that is panic attacks. They often seem to come out of nowhere, making you feel completely out of control. And if you've ever experienced a panic attack, you know how scary they can be. You have this sudden surge of fear or terror that feels overwhelming and irrational often. Your heart starts racing, it's hard to breathe, maybe you feel dizzy or like you might faint. You might experience an overwhelming fear of dying or losing control or just going crazy. Some also sense they're detached from reality, like they're watching themselves from outside their body. And this is a clear symptom of dissociation because the nervous system is in such overwhelm, and so it causes a splitting off from the body effect. And even though panic attacks are your body's misguided attempt to protect you, they can make you feel powerless, reinforcing the cycle of fear. But at their core, if they happen frequently, they're clear signals of a dysregulated nervous system. Panic is the body's way of expressing unresolved survival energy. Trauma can also disrupt normal breathing patterns, making you more prone to overbreathing or hyperventilation. And this can lower CO2 levels, causing dizziness, numbness, and more panic. Basically, your body is freaking out because it thinks you're suffocating even when you're not. Sign number 3 of unhealed trauma can often be subtle and overlooked. Maybe you can't access emotions like joy or grief or anger, or nothing excites you much anymore, even things you once loved. You might feel like life is monotonous, like you're going through the motions without any real connection. And this is often called the freeze response to trauma, when your body decides that shutting down is the safest option. Instead of fighting or running, you mentally check out or dissociate. And when dissociation becomes a default state, it's usually because the system learned at some point in the past that checking out is the safest or maybe only way to survive. Sign number 4 is one I used to deal with myself, and that is struggling to regulate emotions. Now, if you've experienced trauma, especially early in life, your system has learned how to protect you from overwhelming experiences by either overreacting or shutting down. Now, that's not a conscious choice. It's your body's way of keeping you safe. So you might experience sudden outbursts of anger, frustration, or tears over maybe seemingly small triggers. Maybe you snap easily or get stuck in sadness longer than you would like to. And instead of reacting to the present moment, your body is actually responding to old unresolved wounds from the past. A frustrating email from your boss might not just feel like a work problem, it might trigger the same helplessness you felt as a child being scolded. And a friend canceling plans might not just be an inconvenience, it might bring up deep fears of abandonment. So no, it's not that you're being dramatic or too sensitive. Your nervous system is simply reacting from past wounds that never got fully processed. Now, sign number 5. If you constantly feel like you're not enough, no matter what you achieve, this could be an echo of past trauma and manifest as self-doubt and low self-worth. Maybe you criticize yourself harshly for making mistakes, even small ones, or you feel like you don't deserve good things, so that something bad will happen if life starts going well. Or maybe you assume that other people are better, smarter, or more deserving than you. If you've spent years believing you're unworthy, peace or success can feel unnatural, even unsafe. And if people around you growing up made you feel like you had to earn love, if you were blamed for things that weren't your fault, or if you never fully felt truly seen, your little inner child mind adapted. Also, many trauma survivors internalize blame, believing deep down that they are the problem rather than what happened to them. This can lead to lifelong struggles with self-worth and confidence. But here's the truth. This isn't who you are. It's what you learned, and it can be unlearned. Sign number 6. Now, trauma doesn't just live inside you, it plays out in your relationships as well. If you've ever found yourself stuck in unhealthy dynamics, attract emotionally unavailable people, and maybe find yourself in toxic or unfulfilling relationships, this might be why. Maybe you feel clingy and fearful of abandonment. Maybe you need constant reassurance from partners, or maybe you push people away the moment they get too close. Maybe you're fearing intimacy. All of these are responses to attachment wounding in childhood. If love in your past was inconsistent, conditional, or painful, your body wired itself to believe that connection and intimacy is dangerous. Sign number 7. Now, you might identify with this one when, even when life is calm, your mind and body aren't. In this case, your nervous system struggles to shift into a parasympathetic mode, and so the result is that you have a really hard time relaxing, turning off, sitting still, or meditating can be really hard for you as well. And so you might always need something to do, or you constantly keep busy and your calendar is full. And maybe you also feel guilty when you're not being productive. Now, this is a very classic trauma response, which signals that your body is overcoupling calm and relaxation with danger and threat. When all your body knows is stress and activation, it has a hard time trusting calm and struggles to slow down as a consequence. Trauma trains your nervous system to believe that safety comes from staying busy and being in control. Now, healing teaches you that true safety comes from learning how to let go and slow down. Sign number 8. Now, this trauma symptom is often not considered as that. I didn't know about it for the longest time, but once I learned about it, I was able to heal it. And that is the fact that chronic gut issues, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, chronic migraines, and the like, basically a bunch of pain and disease symptoms that are chronic, that they're actually a response to a dysregulated nervous system that's rooted in trauma. When your nervous system gets stuck in survival mode, it floods the body with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And over time, this constant state of alertness and stress wears down the body, leading to digestive issues, chronic pain, and even autoimmune conditions. So if you've been struggling with physical symptoms that seem to have no clear cause, it may not be that your body is broken. It may simply be stuck in a survival state that you were never taught how to release and complete. Healing at this level doesn't just change how you feel emotionally, it transforms how you feel physically as well. Sign number 9. If you grew up in an environment where love, safety, or approval was based on what you did rather than who you were, your nervous system likely learned that being good enough was something you had to earn. Maybe you became the overachiever, constantly pushing yourself to excel so you'd never be criticized. Or perhaps you turn into the peacemaker, the people pleaser, prioritizing everyone else's needs just to feel like you belonged. Either way, the message was the same. Your worth was conditional. And this belief doesn't just disappear in adulthood. Instead, it fuels perfectionism, people-pleasing, and an endless pursuit of external validation. And even when you do accomplish something big, the satisfaction is very fleeting because instead of feeling truly worthy, you're already onto the next goal, chasing a sense of approval that never fully lands. And over time, this relentless cycle leads to burnout, anxiety, and just deep exhaustion of never feeling like you're enough. But in reality, this need of validation is just an echo of an old wound. Sign number 10. This one is probably the most powerful and hidden effect of trauma, and that is shame. Unlike guilt, which is about something you've done, shame is about who you believe you are. It's the persistent, gut-wrenching feeling that you're inherently flawed, unworthy, or broken. I used to feel intense shame after receiving critical feedback, interpreting it as proof that I'm a failure and just not good enough, even though others would simply see it as constructive advice. Now, this strong reaction comes from past wounds where mistakes led to punishment or rejection. You might feel like you're not good enough no matter what you accomplish. Maybe you apologize excessively even when you haven't done anything wrong. Maybe you have an intense fear of being judged, rejected, or seen for who you truly are. And maybe you assume people will leave you if they see the real you. And lastly, sign number 11. This last one is really a result of the many other symptoms and signs of trauma. When emotional pain feels too overwhelming to face, the easiest way to cope is to numb it out. Maybe you find yourself scrolling for hours or binge watching shows or overeating, overdrinking, or throwing yourself into work just to keep your mind busy. Or maybe you take it to the other extreme, you're seeking out risky behaviors, chasing adrenaline, doing anything to feel something other than the emptiness inside. Either way, the pattern is the same. Distraction becomes survival. Because if you slow down, if you sit in silence just with yourself, the emotions you've been avoiding might catch up with you. Now, this isn't about willpower or bad habits, it's a trauma response. When your nervous system hasn't learned how to process emotional pain in a safe way, avoidance becomes the default. Maybe in the past, expressing emotion just wasn't an option. Maybe vulnerability led to rejection or punishment. Or maybe life just moved too fast and there was never space to actually process what hurt you. So instead, your body learned, stay busy, stay distracted, stay numb. The problem Well, what we avoid doesn't disappear. It lingers, shaping our choices and keeping us stuck in cycles of self-sabotage. Now, these are all 11 signs and symptoms for this video, and this list is not exhaustive, meaning there are more, but these 11 are some very important ones. And it's important for you to know that these issues are not personality flaws or signs that something is wrong with you. They are trauma responses. Feeling depressed or anxious or any of the other signs I just covered are not normal, meaning they are consequences of unaddressed trauma. And if you resonate with several of these signs, I would like you to know this: you are not broken. Your reactions, your coping mechanisms and patterns were all learned for survival. They all serve a purpose. The good news: they can be unlearned. And as Peter Levine says, the paradox of trauma is that it has both the power to destroy and the power to transform and resurrect. Yes, healing from trauma is possible. As Peter Levine points out, our systems have an innate capacity to restore itself to health and wellness. And even though trauma is a fact of life, it does not, however, have to be a life sentence. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means becoming whole, integrating all the fragmented parts of ourselves. Now, this is a lifelong process, and it involves moving beyond purely cognitive understanding to experience safety in the body and in relationships. The problem is that many therapy and self-help approaches are not trauma-informed. They often fail to recognize the depth of trauma and focus on cognitive changes while often missing the somatic experience, which is why I highly recommend to watch this next video, in which I will show you how to heal your trauma and your past wounding. And with this, I hope this video was helpful. Take care. Bye.